Welcome back. Let's check out the standards for electric utilities from the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. I think you'll find that these SASB infrastructure standards for electric, gas, and water organizations are, a lot of those are things that you're probably measuring already. And I don't think that it will be a huge adjustment, although it's easy for me to say, to put these in your financial reports. So you see a link here to the standard setting process. I find this kind of interesting on how they went about developing what they call the infrastructure standards, and the electric, gas, and water utilities are part of that infrastructure group. So I'd urge you to check that out. And if you haven't done already, please download that PDF document that was in the beginning of the course, and it has all the links, has links to articles, videos, worksheets, all of those kind of things. I think you'll find it very useful. So the SASB standards for electric utilities and power generations is a formal name, and the coverage of it is power production, transmission, and distribution. So if you have any of those activities, which pretty much covers anything that an electric utility does, you should use these standards when it comes to SASB reporting. Now, if you're just a power producer, just a transmission utility, maybe just a distribution, there's something in there. And like they say at the smorgasbord, there's something for everyone. So check it out. So when it comes to the E standards, the environmental standards for electric utilities and power generators, they cover the things you might anticipate: the greenhouse gas emissions and energy resource planning, air quality, water management, coal ash management, so combustion materials, CCRs they call them, coal combustion residuals. If you're a generator and you have a generating plant, you deal with CCRs all the time. So water management and coal ash management really go with power producers. And remember, we're talking about Scope 1 and Scope 2 disclosures. So Scope 1s are ones that you generate, and Scope 2, if you're a power purchaser, say you have a wholesale power contract, you would measure Scope 2 emissions under the SASB standards. Now you'll notice, this is a page of the actual standards, and every slide in here from now on has a page right out of the SASB document, although I would still urge you to go back and download the SASB document. And you'll see some red lines in here, and you'll say, hey, are these final? Well, the way they did it was they had originally proposed some standards way back in 2014. They had a hearing process, input process, and what the red lines are changes they made from the original file documents that they had. So kind of a different way of doing it, but here we are. So if you go under greenhouse gas emissions and energy resource planning, you see that the columns across the top kind of guide you through the process. You have the accounting metric, and you have the category that they're involved with, what's the unit of measure, metric code that's like an internal code that you would refer back to the SASB document, including the codified metric code, and also they have a information on the revision number. But really what you're going to be using in your disclosure is the topic, the accounting metric, the category, and the unit of measure, because they show you how to calculate each metric. So under greenhouse gas emissions and energy resource planning, we have Scope 1 emissions, we have the percentage covered under emission limiting regulations and emissions reporting regulations. So that's, a state by state, sometimes a federal mandate, and things like that. We have greenhouse gas emissions associated with power deliveries. What we also have is a section on Scope 1 emissions and your long-term and short-term strategies in dealing with the Scope 1 emissions. So what is your plan for reducing those, and so on. So it's kind of a paragraph. You'll see this in the example that we go through. Number of customers that are served in markets that are subject to renewable portfolio standards, so RPS. And then we have air quality items and things of that nature down at the bottom. And we also have water management. So it talks about how you manage water in connection with your power production activities. And then you have, if you had any like findings of non-compliance or water penalties for effluent and things like that, that's described. And again, a paragraph on management of your water water uses when it comes to power production, what the strategies that you have there to mitigate any risk in those areas. Then we have coal ash management, what we call the CCRs, coal combustion residuals. Those come in two flavors. Well, they're not really flavors, are they? But in any case, you have a coal unit. And one type of CCR is where you burn the coal and you have the stack and the smoke's going out the stack. I'm not an engineer, but here's my layperson's explanation of it. The smoke is going out the stack, and what's left over after you burn the coal is ash. So that ash gets disposed of in landfills. That process is governed by the Environmental Protection Agency, and we call those CCRs. Then there's other types of CCRs where if you have a flue gas desulfurization process, where you take that smoke going out the stack and you turn it into something useful, something that is used in production, a raw material. Like gypsum wallboard is one area that you use CCRs that go through a FGD process, and you sell those to companies and you use those to manufacture gypsum wallboard, so the drywall in your houses and things like that. So those are covered under their CCRs, and any issues with the EPA is also involved with that. And so on the environmental side, that's pretty much it. So nothing too unusual. These are probably things that you measure already, is my take on it. And I could be wrong, but I think many utilities and power cooperatives are already measuring these items. Then we get to the social aspects, and here are the social SASB requirements for disclosures: energy affordability, workforce health and safety, end use efficiency and demand, nuclear safety and emergency management, and then grid resiliency. Well, what do we mean by these? Well, let's take a quick walk through some of the items here. Again, the red lines show the changes between what was originally proposed and what the final standards are. So what you see here is the final ones. First one is energy affordability. So it talks about disclosing your rates, typical bills for residential customers, how many customers you've disconnected for non-payment over the last year, and discussion on the impact of external factors on customer affordability of electricity, including the economic conditions of the service territory. Well, that's a little subjective, I guess, but you know your territory better than any others, so you would be able to comment on these particular items. Also, workforce health and safety. So these have to do with injury rates, and these are things that you would already be tracking for OSHA purposes, accidents, so that would be part of it. And we get into end use efficiency and demand, so the percentage of utility revenues from rate structures that are decoupled or have a lost revenue generated clause, and it's a little more complicated accounting factor, but basically it's decoupling is the amount of your energy sales that you lose as you switch to demand side management programs. So say you have a lot of customers that have distributed generation, so solar generation on their homes. You don't budget for that, so you're losing revenue that you didn't budget for, and the idea is that you have to roll that back into rates. And here they're asking you to disclose what's your rate structure for that piece that has been taken away by distributed energy resources from your customers. So a little more complicated, but if you have a lot of DER load, a lot of solar load on your system, your budgeting will get smarter, but there'll be years where you'll have unbudgeted revenue losses because of solar generation from your own customers. And we can do a whole nother topic on that and the importance of that as well. So percentage of electric load served by smart grid technology, customer savings from efficiency measures by market. And then we also have the nuclear safety and emergency management. So if you're a nuclear power producer, there's some disclosures involved there. And then grid resiliency has to do with two areas. If you're a transmission utility, you know you're subject to the rules and regulation of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, so NERC, And then NERC does audits on your system, whether you're complying with their critical infrastructure protection standards, other requirements for trimming trees and rights of way, record keeping, a whole host of things. And if you don't comply, they fine. So they're asking you to, with the SASB disclosure, disclose that. And then other measures of reliability. So the SAIDI, the SAFI, the CAIDI, how often your system is out, how long it lasts for, how many customers are affected by it, is another disclosure that's included in the SASB standards. And then when it comes to governance, there's really no formal standards of SASB disclosures, but what we see in reports is utilities disclosing employee and board diversity, and then also community programs, which is more of a social thing, but community programs and how you help the local community in your service territory with economic development and things like that. So that is a disclosure that's included in lieu of SASB kind of leaving that area blank, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. And then finally, under the SASB disclosures, these include activity metrics of general company information. So you can see it's pretty standard stuff. Number of customers served, electricity delivered by customer class, length of transmission and distribution lines, and total generation, and things like that. So as we go through the sample report, you'll see these in action. It'll make a little more sense than maybe it does now, because right now it's just kind of up in the cloud, and we'll get down into the weeds a little bit. So I have mentioned along the way that the Securities and Exchange Commission has environmental standards that are proposed, and probably by the time you see this, they'll be in effect. And the Securities and Exchange Commission regulate SEC filers. So if you issue common stock, if you issue debt, basically it's investor-owned utilities. So investor-owned utilities issue stock, they're owned by their stockholders. They file 10K reports with the SEC. They file other regulatory reports as well, and the SEC has jurisdiction over what they disclose in their financial statements. So SEC has said, well, we're also going to dig into these areas too. We're going to dig into emissions. So we'll have required disclosures of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and their impact on business operations and financial results. As you know, scope 1 is what, if you're a generator, the emissions that you generate. 2, if you're a power purchaser, that's the emissions that you, in effect, cause by being a power purchaser, and also of your suppliers. And 3 is more general and nebulous, and there aren't really any standards right now on how to measure these. Impact on the community, your customers, things like that. So that's kind of an open thing right now. It's kind of in flux. Then they also will require disclosures on supplier metrics. So emission and sustainability disclosures for your entire supply chain. So who you do business with will be included. Climate, disclosing climate-related risks and the management processes to manage those risks. In other words, what does management do to manage climate risk, and what risk is imposed on your business by the climate? Also, what involvement does your board have in developing strategy when it comes to climate risk and things like that? So I have a link in the handout on an article that we wrote that lists all of these items here. It's pretty lengthy, pretty involved. It also has a link to the SEC rules. If you're SEC related, or SEC regulated rather, I'd take a look at that, because there's quite a bit of work there that would need to be done. And of course, it's so new, there are really no examples to follow. And then the SEC requires, or recommends rather, that you follow this TCFD framework, so the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures framework. And they advocate using the TCFD framework for all your disclosures. And the TCFD, and here you see the link, it's also in your handout, has developed this framework that is kind of like the SASB, but has got a little different twist on it. They cover, governance, disclosing the organization's governance around climate-related risks and opportunity. Then it comes to strategy, disclosing the actual and potential impacts of climate-related risks. and opportunities on the organization's business's strategy and financial planning, risk management, how you identify and manage risk, and then metrics and targets, where the FASB disclosures plug into this metrics and targets area. When we go through the sample report, I have an example of a TCFD framework and also a link to it that you can easily follow. Well, maybe not easily, but you can follow it. So governance around climate-related risks and opportunities. Here you have recommended disclosures, the board's oversight, management's oversight, kind of similar to what we discussed earlier. Then strategy, what are the climate-related risks? What are the impacts of those risks? And based on your strategy, what's the resilience of your organization? So as you see there, talks about including a 2 degrees Celsius or lower scenario. Kind of interesting. Risk management, disclose how the organization identifies, assesses, and manages climate-related risks. So your process for identifying risk, your process for managing climate-related risks, and your processes for identifying, assessing, and managing climate-related risks are integrated into the organization's overall risk management. So all having to do with how you manage risk, assess risk. If you're at all familiar with ERM, so Enterprise Resource Management, which is a school of thought and an approach to managing and mitigating risk, and you have that in your organization, you will totally be able to nail this without too much work. And then the metrics and target, which, as I mentioned, follow the SASB framework when it comes to disclosing metrics and could easily be plugged in to the TCFD framework that the SEC is requiring. So let's take a look at an example report. This is a report from American Electric Power, an investor-owned utility based in the Midwest, wide range of operations, coal, nuclear, renewables, they have it all. So let's take a look and see what their sustainability report looks like, and it's modeled after the SASB standards. So here's a couple of real-life examples I'd like to show you on this reporting. And before we get to the actual SASB report, there's an article I'd like you to reference, and the links will be in your materials as well. But this reference article is on the SEC requirements, proposed requirements for reporting. And so this is at the Utility Accounting Education Specialist website, part of our article collection. And it goes through in a lot of great detail after this summary what the reporting requirements are, the disclosures of risk in various areas, and governance, and how risks are identified and managed and mitigated, and so on, and metrics and target disclosures that are going to be required by the SEC. And then a little opinion piece on what we think this might do to the desire to become a public company and the impact on issuing debt, because you had more reporting, more layers of reporting, that equals more cost. And for some organizations that aren't required to be regulated by the SEC, maybe not utilities so much, but if you're a company thinking of going public and you look at these disclosures, you might, maybe you'll think twice about this depending on your size. But then the report that I'd like to show you on the SASB standards is from American Electric Power. Now this thing is a gem of reporting that's got all the requirements in a nice, concise format. And I think if you're evaluating your reporting, you might want to take a look at this and see how it might fit. So this is their Sustainability Accounting Standards Board report. And so as we go through here, you might recognize these various items with the nomenclature that SASB uses, and the various categories: greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, water management, coal ash management, energy affordability, workforce health and safety, and use efficiency and demand, nuclear issues, and grid resiliency. And you say, well, where's all the numbers? Well, this is the neat part of how they did this. I'll quit jumping around here. I want to drill down. They have this ESG data center So you drill down in here and they have all the metrics that are required to be disclosed by SASB in this area. So for example, when it comes to emissions, here's a list of all the emissions that are required to be disclosed, scope 1, and they're listed with the trend as well. And every other category here, grid reliability, this is the breadth of their system, and then these are the reliability indices that are required to be disclosed by the SASB. So they have them in a nice tabular format, very concise, easy to put together. This is not a hard website to develop, and so on. So something to consider, and check it out as you're reviewing the materials. The other area that they have is this climate impact analysis. So if you drill down into this item here, and the reference will be there, of course, here's the TCFD framework for electric company disclosures. So you see the TCF requirements on the climate variables, what will happen, or what the variable is, what the potential change is, how it affects the assets, the risks and opportunities, the physical and operational impacts. So all that is laid out there, and then it's discussed in the report. And then after that, they have a great explanation of this TCFD framework and the various categories. So governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. So those are all included in here. And I think you'll find this very useful as you develop your reporting model or review the reporting model that you do have, and how it might be changed or simplified or made more robust as you go ahead. So you can see by that report, that is quite an effort, quite an undertaking. And it has a lot of the required disclosures under SASB, has some additional disclosures, and you have to evaluate whether you have the resources in-house to tackle something like that, or even a scaled down version. So that's where a lot of this goes, is what are the resources you have? Do you have the ability to hire and outsource this as well? And I think that's what a lot of organizations are wrestling with right now. So that's a summary of the electric standards under SASB. So let's check out what the gas standards are under SASB and what SASB has to say about that.